I knew I was still alive because that morning, for the first time in years, I wanted someone to look at me, not out of obligation, not like my husband did, eyes grazing over me the way you'd check if the stove was off. I wanted to be seen, noticed, desired. The door clanged shut behind me, louder than I expected, metal echo clapping against my nerves. I froze. The air smelled like rubber, steel, and effort. Hard work baked into the floor, into the walls, into the bodies moving with a kind of brutal grace I couldn't relate to. I clutched my water bottle too tightly, the strap biting into my palm. Everyone here moved like they belonged, like their bodies didn't whisper betrayals the way mine did when I looked in the mirror. I wasn't fat, not really. That's what I told myself. Just soft in all the places I used to be proud of. A chest that defied gravity in all the wrong ways, thighs that pressed against leggings like they were arguing. I missed the woman I used to be. Or maybe I missed being looked at like I mattered. I took a few cautious steps into the gym. Machines loomed like alien beasts, cold, complicated. I hovered near the entrance, half hoping someone would tell me I didn't belong, just so I could turn around and leave without calling it giving up. Then I saw him, leaning against a piece of equipment, dark shirt, hugging a frame sculpted by intention, not accident. When he caught me staring, he smiled, not the condescending kind, no. This smile was warm, curious, like I was a puzzle he was willing to solve. You need a hand. I startled, my water bottle slipped and rolled, clattering toward him. He picked it up easily, handing it back with calloused fingers that looked strong but clean. I'm Eli, he said, trainer here. I took the bottle, our fingers almost brushing. Claire, I managed. I'm new, he nodded. Yeah, I figured you've got the look. What look? I asked, defensively. He grinned. I watched a YouTube tutorial, but everything still looks like medieval torture look. I laughed, a real laugh, the first in God. I didn't even know. He motioned toward the rows of machines. Want me to walk you through it? I promise not to bite. I should have said no, should have told him I could manage, that I wasn't here for anyone else's attention, that I was strong and capable and whole. But none of that was true, so I said yes. And just like that, something began to shift quietly, invisibly, like the first crack in a frozen lake. I stood just inside the entrance, already regretting every decision that had brought me here. The gym buzzed with movement and rhythm, metal clinking, rubber mats squeaking, music thumping, just loud enough to blur thoughts. I could feel sweat in the air, not mine, but 100 others who came here to shape themselves into something harder, leaner, better. I hadn't belonged to that category in a long time. Just one trial session, I'd told myself. But even saying it out loud felt like a lie I didn't believe. I adjusted the strap on my sports bag, fingers fumbling. My heart was beating faster than it should have, not from exertion, from exposure. This wasn't my world. I wasn't someone who walked into rooms like this with confidence. I moved toward the corner, pretending to check my phone really. I was just avoiding eye contact. The leggings I wore clung in ways that didn't feel flattering. They reminded me of every curve I used to admire in the mirror. Now they were just reminders of time, of softness, of how much I'd let myself disappear behind dinner plates and silence. I wasn't unhealthy. That's what I told myself I was. Let go. But I was invisible, and I didn't want to be anymore. Hey, a voice said, calm, smooth, too close. I turned, startled. A man stood beside me, young, mid to late 20s maybe, lean muscle, sun-browned skin, that casual kind of strength that didn't need to be flexed to be obvious. You okay? He asked, tilting his head. My mouth opened, then closed again. I felt like a tourist who'd walked into the wrong country. Just figuring things out, I said. He smiled, easy and warm. First time, I nodded. Well, you're doing great. Most people just freeze. I might still be frozen, I muttered. He laughed, one of those low chuckles that didn't mock, just invited. I'm Eli. I work here, want me to show you around. There was no pressure in his voice, just kindness. But underneath it, something else, interest, maybe curiosity. I hesitated for a second too long. I promise I won't make you lift a car on your first day, he added. That made me laugh. Okay, I said, lead the way. We started walking together, weaving through rows of machines. He pointed things out, explained their names, and what they were for. I tried to absorb it all, nodding along, though most of it sounded like a foreign language. What made you come in today? He asked. As we passed the dumbbells, I paused. That question was bigger than it sounded. What made me come in? The late nights with Mark barely speaking. The dinners eaten side by side in silence. The way his eyes no longer paused on me. The way I'd caught him looking at other women, tight skin, fresh smiles, and felt something cave in quietly. I just figured it was time, I said instead. Eli nodded, as if he heard more than I said. That's a good reason. Time's undefeated. He didn't push, just kept walking. I watched the way he moved, fluid, light, like his body knew the space, and the space welcomed him back. Mine didn't feel like that. I felt like a shadow, moving through someone else's spotlight. He stopped near a cable machine and showed me a basic move, then watched as I copied it badly. He didn't laugh, didn't correct with sharpness, just stepped in gently and adjusted the handle in my grip. You've got good form, he said. Once you get used to how this place works, your body's gonna catch on quick. I rolled my eyes. You say that to everyone. No, he said, with a grin. Only the ones who look like they forgot how strong they really are. The way he said it landed differently, like he wasn't just talking about muscle. I looked away, embarrassed, not by him, but by how much his words meant. We finished the walkthrough. He handed me a schedule with available personal training slots. I've got some space if you want to work together, he said. No pressure. I took the card, still warm from his hand. Okay, I said. Maybe I'll sign up. Cool. He paused, his smile softening. You've already done the hardest part, Claire. You showed up. Something shifted inside me. Not big, not loud, but real. I left the gym that day with muscles that hadn't moved in years beginning to wake up, and a feeling I hadn't carried in longer than I could remember. Hope, or maybe hunger, the kind that starts in your chest, not your stomach. The mirror in the locker room wasn't forgiving. Harsh lights hummed overhead as I stared at my reflection. Towel slung around my neck, skin flushed from the workout. My hair clung to my forehead in damp strands, and my face, God, when had I started looking so tired all the time I leaned closer, tugging the edge of my top down to examine my stomach. Not flat, not firm, just there. A quiet reminder of years spent sitting too long, giving too much, fading too far. I ran a hand over my arm, where a faint line of definition teased its way beneath the skin. Maybe it was the lighting, maybe not. Either way, I liked seeing it, liked the idea of my body remembering its edges again. Outside, the gym pulsed with noise, metal, breath, focus. But in here, it was just me. And the truth, Mark hadn't noticed anything. Not the shift in how I walked. Not the way I started holding eye contact a beat longer with strangers. Not the fact that I'd begun to care again about how my jeans fit. But Eli noticed. Eli noticed everything. Every time I walked in, his eyes found mine before I could even wave. He always had that grin, not cocky, just sure. Like he already knew I'd surprise myself today. Superstar, he called once as I entered. The word made something inside me flutter. I told myself it was harmless. Encouragement, professionalism, trainers were supposed to be motivating. But when he stood close, guiding my form, when his fingers brushed my spine to adjust posture, my heart didn't beat steady, it pounded. And the worst part, I liked it. I'd spent so long being untouched, unnoticed, that even the smallest gesture, his voice low beside my ear, the warmth of his hand, felt electric. I wasn't chasing anything. I wasn't looking to replace Mark or ruin my marriage. I just wanted to feel awake again, to remember what it was like to be seen, to matter. That afternoon, after our session, I sat on the bench tying my shoes. My legs were sore, in a good way. The kind of ache that meant I'd shown up, tried, pushed. I was learning to crave it. Eli sat beside me, arms resting on his knees, glancing sideways. "You're doing better than you think," he said. I gave him a look. "You say that to all your projects." He laughed. "You're not a project." "Oh no. No, projects are people you build. You're already built. You just forgot where the on switch is." Something about the way he said it made my throat tighten. Like he saw through the layers I'd carefully wrapped around myself for years. He didn't try to push, didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. But he stayed there, quiet, steady, present. And when I stood to leave, he touched my elbow lightly, just a tap, just enough to make me pause. "Claire," he said, "you've got this." Those words echoed longer than they should have. That night, at home, Mark sat on the couch, scrolling his phone like always. I walked past in leggings and a loose top, still flushed from the gym, still carrying the heat of Eli's words somewhere under my skin. Mark didn't look up. I stood at the fridge, not really hungry, not sure what I was searching for. After a minute, I grabbed a glass of water and turned around. He was still on his phone, still not looking. I could have said something. I could have told him I was changing, that I felt different. That part of me was waking up again, and I needed him to notice before it was too late. But I didn't. I just walked away. And upstairs, alone in the bathroom, I peeled off my clothes and stood under the harsh vanity light again. I looked at myself, not with judgment this time, but with curiosity, noticing. That was the word. I was starting to notice myself again. And for the first time in years, I felt the smallest flicker of something I thought I'd lost for good, desire. Not for someone else, for me. I didn't expect to feel it. The heat. Not from the workouts, though those left me gasping most days, but from something else, something subtler, warmer, a flicker that started low in my chest and spread outward every time Eli smiled. He wasn't overt, he never crossed lines, but his presence had gravity. And I was moving in his orbit more than I wanted to admit. It was in the little things. The way he said my name. The way he held eye contact just long enough for my stomach to tighten. The way his voice dropped an octave when he leaned in to explain a movement, making me feel like I was the only person in the gym. "You're stronger than you think," he said during one session, watching me push through a set of weighted lunges. "Or you're just very persuasive," I joked, breathless. He grinned. "Maybe both." That day, I caught sight of myself in the mirrored wall, not by accident. I looked, really looked. Sweat slicked my forehead. My arms trembled slightly from exertion. My shirt clung to my sides. And yet, I saw something I hadn't in a long time, power even if it was messy and new. I stood straighter, and when Eli walked by, his eyes met mine through the reflection, just a second. But it was enough to make me feel seen in a way Mark hadn't done in years. At home, things were quieter than usual. Mark barely looked up when I came through the door. He was on the couch, same as every night, scrolling. I stood in the hallway for a moment, still catching my breath from the drive. I thought maybe he'd notice the way I moved now. The way my body carried itself. He didn't. Instead, he asked if we had any more sparkling water. I said no. That was the end of the conversation. Later, over dinner, I watched him, the curve of his shoulders, the way he never reached for my hand anymore, the way he complimented a newscaster's outfit without thinking twice. "You like her dress?" I asked. Neutral, he shrugged. "Yeah, it's just sharp polished." "Polished," I repeated, like someone who cares how they look. He didn't respond, didn't look up. I sat back, feeling the air between us harden. In bed that night, I faced away from him, my body curled in toward itself. He didn't touch me, didn't even shift closer. And I realized then that maybe he wasn't angry or cold or tired. Maybe he just didn't see me anymore. The next day at the gym, Eli was already waiting near the bench rack when I arrived. "Someone's early," I said. He smiled. "I wanted to make sure you had a spot." His words hung there, innocent enough, but they pressed gently against something fragile inside me. We trained hard that session. Harder than usual, he pushed. I followed. And every time he said, "Just one more," I gave it, not because I wanted the reps, because I wanted to keep hearing his voice. Afterward, I leaned against the wall, chest rising and falling, lungs burning. Eli stood nearby, watching me with something between admiration and careful restraint. "You're a different woman than the one who walked in here 2 weeks ago," he said. I looked at him, unsure whether to thank him or deny it. He didn't wait for a response. "You've got something people can't fake," he added, "and most don't even know they're missing it." "What's that?" "Hunger." The word echoed in my ribs. Not for food, not even for him, for life, for color, for touch, for fire, for anything beyond the numb space I'd been living in. I left that day buzzing. And later, when Mark finally looked at me and said, "You've been at that gym a lot lately," I smiled without apology. "I like how it makes me feel," I said. He nodded, but his eyes narrowed just slightly. That was the first time I saw something shift in him, not enough to name, but enough to know he'd started paying attention. Too late, too quietly. The personal training room was smaller than the main floor, warmer, too. There was a stillness to it that made everything feel more immediate. The padded mat beneath my feet was soft, grounding, but my pulse had its own rhythm now, something quick, something sharp. Eli closed the door behind us with a soft click. "It's quieter in here," he said. It was. No clanging weights, no music, just the sound of our breath and the gentle whir of air conditioning. I shifted from foot to foot, unsure of what to do with my hands. "You've been pushing yourself hard," Eli said, nodding toward the bench. "That soreness is going to settle in deep." I laughed. "I've already started naming the muscles I didn't know I had." He smiled, then his tone changed, still gentle, but lower, deliberate. "Want me to work some of that tension out? Just shoulders and back, nothing intense. You'll thank me tomorrow." I hesitated, words caught in my throat. I wasn't sure if it was okay to say yes, but I wanted to. And that wanting came with a warmth that spread through my chest like a quiet ache. "Okay," I said, almost whispering. He grabbed a clean towel, draped it across the table, and gestured for me to lie down. I climbed up carefully, heart thudding against the vinyl, and turned my face to the side. Then I felt it, his hands, slow and sure, pressing down on my shoulders, firm, not rough, focused. His touch wasn't invasive. It was steady, measured, as if he knew exactly how much pressure to give without crossing the space between professional and something more dangerous. "You've been holding a lot right here," he murmured. His fingers worked across my upper back, unlocking something I didn't realize I'd clenched for years. There was no sound in the room except the gentle drag of his palms, the soft exhale from my lips, the creak of the table beneath us. My breath deepened, time stretched. And then something shifted, not in his hands, in the air. The warmth that pulsed from him wasn't just physical anymore. It moved like a quiet current, an invisible tether that ran from his fingertips through my skin, into places far beyond muscle. I closed my eyes, and a single image came to me. The surface of still water breaking, finally, under the weight of something real. My thoughts scattered, not into panic, but into softness. And just as the tension reached its most delicate height, when the air felt almost too charged to breathe, his hands lifted. He stepped back. "That's enough for today," he said quietly. His voice had changed, softer, heavier. I sat up slowly, feeling the weight of something unsaid settling across my chest. Eli stood a few feet away, arms crossed loosely, but there was a glint in his eyes, mischief, or maybe restraint. "Spoil you all at once," he added, smiling. I managed a breathless laugh, though my throat was tight. "Thanks," I said, fingers brushing the hem of my shirt as if grounding myself. As we walked out together, I noticed how close we moved, not touching, but aware. My skin still remembered his hands, not their weight, their intention. When I got home, Mark was at the kitchen island, sipping coffee and scrolling his tablet. "Hey," he said without looking up. "Hey." I dropped my bag by the door and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were still warm. He didn't ask how my workout went, didn't comment on the flush in my cheeks or the tremble in my fingertips, didn't look long enough to see anything. But something inside me had shifted, a quiet defiance, a pulse that hadn't been there before. Later that night, when we lay side by side in bed, his back to me, mine to the ceiling, I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for him to reach, not for him to speak. I already had someone who noticed. And that noticing had opened a door in me that could never be quietly shut again. I didn't plan to invite him. It just slipped out, one of those moments when your mouth moves faster than your doubts. I was standing in the kitchen, tossing salad into a bowl, while Mark pulled the roast chicken from the oven. We weren't talking much, just moving around each other like cautious ghosts. Then I said it. "I asked Eli to come over for dinner tonight." Mark froze for a beat, hands still gripping the oven mitts. He looked at me, expression unreadable. "What for?" I shrugged, kept my tone light. "Thought it'd be nice. We've been working together for weeks now. Just figured we could all catch up." He didn't say anything, just gave a short nod and turned back to the chicken. But the tension in his shoulders didn't settle. I set the table with deliberate care, wine glasses, cloth napkins, candles I hadn't used in months. It wasn't romantic, not exactly, but it wasn't nothing either. The doorbell rang at 7:12. I heard Mark open the door, their voices, one cautious, the other too casual. "Illy," Mark said, flat. "Thanks for coming." "Thanks for having me," Eli replied, warm. His voice carried that same confident ease, the one that wrapped itself around a room and made it feel like he belonged. I walked out from the kitchen, drying my hands on a towel. "Glad you made it," I said, smiling just a beat too long. Eli looked at me. His eyes sparked something subtle, something shared. Wouldn't miss it. We sat at the table, Mark at one end, Eli and I on the same side. The first few bites passed in silence. The clink of cutlery, the only sound. Then Mark cleared his throat. "So, Eli, how'd you get into training?" Eli leaned back slightly, lifting his wine glass. "I've always been drawn to transformation, physical, mental. There's something about helping people come back to themselves." Mark nodded slowly. "And what kind of transformation do you think Claire's going through?" I didn't breathe. Eli didn't blink. The kind you can't ignore. The air between us grew denser. He didn't look at me, but I felt the weight of him beside me. Felt the way Mark's gaze shifted, curious, suspicious. I reached for my glass, letting my foot drift slightly beneath the table. Just a small movement. Just enough for Eli to notice. Just enough for Mark to sense. Eli didn't flinch. His thigh tensed, held the contact. He kept talking something about nutrition plans, habit formation. But every word floated over the undercurrent pulling us taut. When dinner ended, Mark stood and began collecting plates. I followed him into the kitchen. He didn't look at me. "What's going on, Claire?" His voice was low, even, but the tight line of his jaw gave him away. "Nothing you need to worry about," I said softly. He stared at me for a long second, searching. I didn't flinch. I walked out of the kitchen, back to the dining room. "Illy," I said, my voice calm, deliberate, "would you mind helping me upstairs? I want to show you something." He stood. No hesitation, no questions. Mark was still in the kitchen, silent. Listening, Eli followed me. I didn't look back. Upstairs, the air was different, thicker, charged. I opened the door to the bedroom and stepped inside. Eli paused at the threshold. "You sure about this?" I turned to face him. I didn't answer with words. I didn't need to. I walked toward him slowly, like every step was a promise. My hand found his, and that was all it took. We crossed the threshold together, and I closed the door behind us with a quiet, final click. The bedroom was dimly lit, the last of the daylight stretching across the floor like a soft shadow. Eli stood just inside the doorway, his body quiet, almost reverent. The confidence he carried so effortlessly downstairs had softened, transformed into something slower, more deliberate. I stepped closer, one breath at a time, until the space between us wasn't a space at all. My hand reached for his arm, then paused, not out of fear, but out of recognition. This wasn't a transaction. It wasn't escape. It was acknowledgement. My fingertips brushed against the fabric of his sleeve. Warmth met warmth. The contact lit something small but steady between us. He looked at me, not with hunger, not with conquest, but with clarity, like he saw every version of me, the woman I used to be, the one I tried to be, and the one who now stood in front of him, choosing. His forehead touched mine, just that, a simple connection. a grounding. The air shifted. It thickened with silence and something more electric, like the hum before a storm, but gentler inside me. Everything quieted, the noise, the doubt, the shame, all of it dimmed, and in that stillness, I let go of who I thought I needed to be, of what I owed to anyone else, of the fear that this would end before it began. I leaned in, not for permission, not for invitation, but because the moment had called, and I had finally decided to answer. We moved together slowly, not chasing, not taking, just meeting. His touch was not possession, it was remembering. A kind of unfolding happened in me then, like the first petal of spring that opens not because someone demands it, but because the light finally feels safe. Time blurred, not rushed, not frantic. We moved like a tide coming home. There were no words, just the rhythm of breath, a series of pulses and pauses, a surrender that didn't feel like loss, but arrival when it was over. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Eli lay beside me, arm resting lightly across the space between us, not claiming it, just holding it. I stared at the ceiling, the soft whir of the fan the only sound. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt full, not of him, of myself, of the version of me I thought had died in the quiet. She wasn't gone. She had just been waiting for me to come back and choose her. It was raining when I pulled into the gym parking lot, the kind of slow, steady drizzle that softened the world and made everything feel like a secret. I walked in late, not on purpose, but not entirely by accident either. Eli was already waiting near the mats, stretching, his movements smooth and quiet. When he saw me, he smiled, an easy smile, the kind that carried no weight, and yet pressed against something inside me. "Thought you might not show," he said, teasing. I dropped my bag, brushing damp hair from my face. "Traffic," I lied. "We didn't mention the night before, not with words." But our bodies remembered. The space between us now held something new, quiet, charged, alive. We started with basic warm-ups, squats, lunges. He guided my posture with gentle corrections, never lingering longer than he should have. But each touch sent a hum down my spine, like muscle memory no longer belonged to muscle alone. We moved into deeper stretches. I sat on the mat, legs extended, reaching forward. Eli knelt beside me, one hand on my lower back, guiding. "Breathe into it," he said softly. And I did. He leaned in just slightly, his hand pressing with a kind of patience that felt almost reverent. My breath caught not from the stretch, but from the nearness of him, the warmth that passed from his skin to mine without needing permission. I tilted my head, barely a fraction, and saw it through the glass wall at the far end of the room. Mark. He stood just outside the gym entrance, half shadowed by the building's overhang, his expression unreadable behind the drizzle-smeared window. But his fists were clenched. I didn't move. Eli was still speaking, gently, guiding me through the next breath, the next angle. He didn't see Mark, only I did. And I didn't stop him. I let Eli keep his hand where it was, let his voice settle over me like mist, let my body stay open, grounded in that quiet moment of care, even as I knew my husband was watching every second. When the stretch ended, Eli stepped back, unaware. "You're getting more flexible," he said, smiling. I nodded, throat tight. "Thanks." By the time we left the room, Mark was gone, vanished into the rain like a ghost, who'd only come to confirm what he already knew. I stood in the locker room alone, my reflection staring back from the mirror, damp skin, red cheeks, eyes wide with something that wasn't guilt. It should have been, but it wasn't. What I felt was sharper, stranger, a flicker of defiance that tasted like steel on my tongue. Outside, the rain kept falling, quiet, relentless, and I knew something irreversible had just happened, not because Mark had seen, but because I had let him. The house was unusually quiet. Mark had been home when I returned, but he hadn't said much. A look, a nod, the kind of silence that wasn't passive, but waiting. Coiled, I poured a glass of water, took a slow sip, and leaned against the counter. He stood across from me, arms folded, gaze sharp. "You want to tell me what that was?" he asked finally. What was? "Don't play stupid, Claire." His voice wasn't raised, if anything, it was too calm. "I saw you at the gym with him." I held his stare. "And what exactly did you see?" His jaw tightened. Enough. I waited for the explosion, the lecture, the accusations. But none came. Just that low, simmering disapproval he wore like a second skin. The kind that made me feel smaller before I even knew I was shrinking. But not this time. I took a slow breath, let it settle in my chest before I spoke. "I didn't hide anything, Mark." He flinched at that, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift. But I saw it. "I saw the way he touched you," he said. "He adjusted my posture." "Is that what we're calling it? Is that what bothers you?" I asked, quieter now. "That he touched me, or that you never do?" Silence. A long, hard silence that split the space between us like a crack in concrete. He looked at me, really looked. And for a second I thought he might reach out, say something true, something raw. But he didn't. Instead, he turned away, picked up his phone from the table, and stared at it like it held the version of our life he preferred. "Whatever this is," he said without looking up, "I hope it's worth it." "It is," I said, no hesitation. That night, I lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling while Mark slept beside me, still and distant. There was no comfort in the closeness, no bridge to cross. I reached for my phone, opened a message thread I'd never meant to use. "One word tonight." I hit send before I could second guess it. The air felt lighter afterward, not freer, but clearer. I stood, walked quietly to the bathroom, and looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection didn't flinch, not this time, because something had broken earlier, yes, but not me. And what was coming wasn't collapse, it was clarity. The moment he walked through the door, I felt it, something in me settling, something else coming undone. Eli didn't speak right away. He didn't have to. He stood in the hallway, rain still clinging to his jacket, his eyes fixed on mine like we'd already had the conversation. I stepped back, just enough to let him in, just enough to close the door behind him with a soft, final sound upstairs. The light was dim, not intentional, just the way the room had come to feel lately, half-lit, suspended, waiting. We walked up in silence. I didn't check to see if Mark was watching from the living room. I didn't need to. Every step was its own answer. Inside the bedroom, I paused. Eli stood just behind me, hands at his sides, like a man invited into sacred ground. He didn't move until I did. When I turned to face him, there was no hesitation. I stepped forward, and in that small motion, something opened, not just in the space between us, but inside me. A soft collapse of walls I hadn't realized I was still holding. He reached for my hand, not to claim it, to meet it. That first touch wasn't spark or fire. It was recognition, a slow ignition, like breath warming frost-bitten fingers, coaxing life back into what had long gone numb. Our foreheads touched, and I felt the rest of the world fall away, not vanish, but dissolve, like fog burned off by morning sun. I could still hear my own breath, but it was layered now, braided with his. The rhythm of two people choosing quiet over explanation when our bodies moved. It wasn't with urgency. It was a kind of unfolding, a gentle unwinding of silence. The distance between skin and soul dissolved not through contact, but through presence. Time slowed. My heartbeat became the only constant, a steady thrum against something ancient and tender. The space around us thickened, not heavy, but whole, like we'd stepped into a moment that didn't exist on clocks. His breath on my neck was not desire, it was reverence. And when he held me not tightly, but completely, I felt a shift that had nothing to do with touch. It was the feeling of finally being allowed to arrive in my own body. The ceiling disappeared. The room melted to its edges. What remained was sensation without shape, emotion without name. We didn't speak when it ended. We lay still, our silence no longer empty. His fingers grazed mine, and I let them stay. I turned to him, eyes half closed. "This wasn't about you," I whispered. He looked at me steady. "It was about me finally seeing myself." He didn't nod, he didn't smile, but the way he looked at me, unflinching, unafraid, told me he understood. The apartment was small. One bedroom, a balcony, walls painted the color of early morning. It smelled like lemon and paper, new beginnings, and quiet promises. I didn't take much when I left, just what I needed, just what was mine. Mark hadn't tried to stop me. He hadn't asked for explanations. There were no bags packed in anger, no slammed doors. Just two people who had lived parallel lives for too long, finally stepping off their own tracks. Some endings don't come with noise. They come with silence that settles in like dust. The mornings here were different. I ran now, not far, just enough to feel my body remember its own momentum. My feet hit pavement with a rhythm that matched my breath, and I watched as the city slowly peeled itself open to the sun. I didn't see Eli much after that night. We exchanged a few messages, a short goodbye that wasn't sad, just complete. He had given me something I couldn't ask for and wouldn't take twice, a mirror I hadn't known I needed. But this story was never about him. I sat on my balcony in the evenings, sipping tea, watching lights blink on across the skyline. Sometimes I missed the shape of my old life, the symmetry of 2 cups in a kitchen, the sound of another body in the house. But I never missed being unseen. I started writing again, nothing groundbreaking, just pages, words, a voice that had been buried under years of silence. I wrote about women finding their way back to themselves, not through love, not through loss, but through the quiet courage of choosing truth over comfort. The world didn't shift when I left, but I did. I became the woman who opened her own door, who sat in the middle of her own stillness and didn't flinch. Some days, I still wondered what Mark was thinking, whether he looked at the empty side of the bed and felt its weight, whether he replayed moments and thought of what could have been. But I didn't wait for the answers, because this wasn't about regret. It was about reclamation. And if anyone asked me now what changed, I wouldn't tell them about Eli, or the gym, or the dinner that cracked the silence wide open. I would tell them the truth, that one day I got tired of disappearing, and I chose, instead, to become undeniable.